Hi, everybody. I think you will all agree that that was an absolutely inspiring session with Ryan. And next up, we've got our Making Work Better Everyday panel. Betterworks Principal Customer Success Manager Ingrid Cullen will be moderating a discussion with Diane Adams of Sprinklr, Michaela Schoberova of Colgate-Palmolive, and Kate Beatty of Inspirati Leadership Solutions.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. I hope you all enjoyed Ryan's talk just now. I will do a quick introduction. I'm Ingrid. As Jamie mentioned, I'm Principal Customer Success Manager here at Betterworks. I've been with Betterworks for about 6 years, and I've worked with every team from small groups rolling out OKRs to global organizations transforming their performance. So we have a quick poll that we are going to launch to just get some of your ideas going, and then we'll jump into our panel discussion. Great. So what is the biggest performance challenge you're trying to tackle in your organization today? Just go ahead and click the first one that really comes to mind, and we'll look at that. And then we'll go around and introduce our panelists today. Great. So, yeah. And then, Myra, I don't know how long you want to keep the poll open. All right, well, we wait for a couple more responses. Let's go around and introduce our panelists. So Kate, maybe we'll start with you. Tell us just a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Ingrid, and hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'm coming to you from sunny but cold Colorado. I know we've got a couple of people in the audience who are from Colorado, so hopefully you guys are finding enough heat to stay warm. A little bit about myself. So first off, I would just start with, I love working with leaders to help them address that kind of leadership crisis that Ryan was just telling us about. And at my heart and my soul, that's the work that I do. I actually started, though, my career as an engineer, but I was on a leadership training program, and I found that that was so much more exciting than the actual engineering I was doing. So I shifted into organizational psychology. I spent most of my life at the Center for Creative Leadership then, doing leadership development, leadership training, and really just studying the art of the work of the leader. I, about 5 years ago, joined a large manufacturing company and headed up their learning and organization development function. That's where I met Ingrid. That's where I became a huge fan of Betterworks. So at some point during the panel today, I'm sure I'll share some stories from there. But now I have my own firm. It's called Inspirati Leadership Solutions. And we really partner with executives who want to learn to lead in new ways that engages and inspires people. We offer executive coaching, team development, leadership development, and talent and organization development solutions as well. So happy to be here and excited to share with you some thoughts today.
Michaela, let's hear from you.
Thanks, Ingrid. And hi, everyone. A pleasure to be here. My name is Michaela Schoberova. In case you wonder where my accent is from, I'm Slovakian. I am currently the Worldwide Director for People, Organizational, and Leadership Development at Colgate. You all probably know Colgate-Palmolive. We are a company that's present all around the world, very global, employees in more than 80 countries. And I'm sure I hope you are using some of our brands. I have been at Colgate for the past 20 years in various roles of business, HR, or generalist business-facing roles. As well as in this area of expertise of performance, development, talent management, leadership, and change. So it's a pleasure to be here. We have been a partner with Betterworks for now I think it's going to be soon 2 years where we partnered with them to enable how we manage performance and make it better at Colgate. So pleasure to be here and discuss.
Thank you for joining us, Michaela. And now, Diane, please introduce yourself.
Great, thank you. So also excited to be here. I'm Diane Adams, and just a little bit about myself. My passion is inspiring and enabling people to live extraordinary lives, personally and professionally. And I've just been really fortunate in my career to be part of high growth tech companies where the leadership team, the CEO, the leadership teams also shared that passion, and they believed that culture was a differentiator. You know, and much of my career I spent with Cisco Systems, and there I had the privilege to work to know Doug Dennerlein, who leads Betterworks, and we've been on this journey together for a long time. And today I lead what I call culture and talent, which is human resources for Sprinklr. And we're an enterprise software company that is in the unified customer experience management space. So excited to be here and talk more about this topic.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Kate, Michaela, Diane, for those introductions. We'll just take a quick look back at the poll to see what we heard from the audience. Looks like enabling managers is the top priority. That's definitely something that I hear from my organizations as well, that they're really looking on focusing on that manager-employee relationship. Broader alignment of the organization's top strategic priorities. That's both a kind of developmental, making sure people know that they have the skills to meet the requirements, and also giving meaning to that work. People knowing what impact they're having is so huge. And of course, better performance data, adopting their program, of course, some others. So great to hear from our audience. But yeah, to kick off our discussion, so we just heard from Ryan about human-centric leadership, and he talked about the importance of really inspiring emotional commitment and alignment towards a shared purpose. And I know that's something that you all feel really strongly about. So how are you applying this concept in your organizations or the organizations that you advise?
So I can speak to that a little bit. There's our overall organizational purpose, right? That we hope is very inspiring to people. We think of ourselves as being in the health space, and our purpose is to reimagine healthier futures for all people. Lots of people around the world use our products and their pets. We have a pet nutrition business, and the planet. We really care a lot about sustainability of what we bring to the world. So in our approach to how we manage performance, we actually want people to think about how their objectives link to that overall purpose. And we've also recently introduced sort of a change into our ratings. We still use ratings where we talk about impact, right? So we want people to make impact in what they're doing, as opposed to, be a high performer, right? Or different kind of labels that could be used. And, Ryan also talked about being human-centric, right? And we think ultimately it's about conversations. It's not about ratings. It's about how people interact and what kind of conversations they have, because as humans, we naturally want to be growing and better at what we do. And that happens through conversations.
Yeah. And I'm glad to build off of what Michaela said is, one of the things that we've spent a lot of time on over the past several months is getting clearer than ever in terms of the culture that we want to create. As a matter of fact, I'm here with we're doing a leadership program today, and then we're going worldwide. And this is the essence of it, that the culture is two parts, really, that we want to be a kind and caring culture, And so you think about the human-centric piece of it, and we want to be a culture that inspires and it drives extraordinary results. And then to your point, Michaela, about the conversations, one of the things, and I could talk more about it later, that we have done, our quarterly conversations, we refer to them as the Employee Delight Assurance Program. There are three pieces to it. The leader asks the person on their team, their direct report. The first thing that's asked, so let's take the CEO and me. He's going to say to me, on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy am I? And then we're going to go deeper on that. So it starts with caring. The second part of that is performance. He's going to say, how would I assess my performance for the last quarter? Scale of 1 to 10. We'll have that discussion for alignment, and then we'll talk about the next quarter and priorities. And the third piece of that conversation is around how did I do and assess myself on my learning goals? And then we'll talk about the go forward. But I think the most important piece, and this has been game changing for us. There was a day when attrition was way higher than we wanted. And this was a key way that we turned that, because we knew we needed to start with the care before we started talking about performance and before we started, talking about the learning. So the results of that were really significant.
I really like the integration of the well-being, right?
Right.
In your conversations. Really nice.
I do too, Diane, in the way in which, the values that you hold and what you're trying to drive in the culture are operationalized through that. What a great example. I'm going to come at this from a slightly different perspective. I'm going to come at it more through the lens of leadership. And I really resonated with what Ryan was saying a lot in that, shared purpose and then commitment and alignment. Because even at the Center for Creative Leadership, we defined leadership, we still do, as the process by which we create direction, alignment, and commitment, all three of those. And different leaders do it in different ways, but finding your way to do that is what's so critical. I think, in terms of the work I do with lots of different organizations now, what I see is leaders do a pretty good job of creating direction, but alignment and actually infusing or creating commitment in their behavior is where there might be some challenges. It's where there's kind of some consistent gaps. I mean, if we just take like change and transformation that's happening in organizations, they can go forward and say, here's the change we want to make. And, I know I need to train you and tell you what it is. And so let me go do that. But that doesn't create alignment and commitment. The only way you really do that in the midst of change is engaging people in it, the way Howard Schultz did as an example in the videos that we saw today. So in that OD world, the world of change leadership is really about bringing people in and enrolling them to be a part of that change, to participate in it, to help not just define, what they're going to need to do differently, but, how do we work together to be consistent with this? Because they know better, actually, than the top leader might know. It takes some humility. And I think that that's harder. It's easy to tell people what to do, to acknowledge and admit that I may not know how this plays out in your world on a day-to-day basis is very different. And so people-centered leadership requires a level of humility and a level of vulnerability that leaders don't always want to show. So that's one way we work with them. And then the other thing I'll just touch on briefly is this notion about empathy. We know it is a core driver of leadership effectiveness. It's shown, to help us with engagement. It's shown by, helping us through conflict resolution that builds trust. Empathy is such a core thing, but leaders are struggling to be able to show that. And there's this mindset almost about it. Like, if I'm empathetic, I can't be tough when I need to be. I see that so frequently. And I believe that, we really need to help them demonstrate both caring, as Diane talked about, and the push for results to do both. So how do they see it as a both and versus an either or is, a lot of the coaching work I'm doing actually right now. So Diane, I may steal some of what you just said.
Well, you know, you're making me think, Kate, because literally right before I walked in here, our conversation with our leaders was that the kind and caring and driving extraordinary results are not mutually exclusive. It's the power of the and, right? Which is exactly what you're saying. You also made me think, you know, one of my favorite quotes that is people don't care how much you know till they know how much you care, right? We can all think about our own career journey and know just how true that is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that quote too. I love it as well.
Yeah, I think that's a nice takeaway because that I was going to say I love that concept as well, and it resonates with some of my own experiences. That when you see that real care from leadership and willingness to understand the on the ground experience, it goes really far. And to that point, we see that managers are just so critical in what that overall employee experience is. They're really the first connection that employees have to leadership. So how have you equipped your managers with the knowledge and tools to help their people, and what impact has that had on their teams and the overall organization?
So
I
I'll
was
try.
thinking.
Go ahead.
No, it's
Okay,
fine.
so Ingrid, I was going to reflect back on some of the work we did together. I'm just going to jump in, Michaela. When we were implementing our Elevate Your Performance program, which is what we called it at the organization where Ingrid and I were working together, our first point of focus was on managers and the conversations they were having. In fact, I think we actually prioritize that over things like OKR setting and the rolling out of OKRs and all of that. It was really about the manager. One of our team members had this brilliant idea. She said, well, how about if every quarterly conversation we offer training to the managers? And that training could be around things like, how do you set good OKRs so they make sure that their employees are doing that? But they're also around things like, how do you listen? How do you give effective feedback? And at that point in time, we were just structuring our conversations very straightforward. It was, what do you need me to stop, start, and continue? That was it. So it was a very simple structure. And I will tell you, I think that gave us huge benefits to do that kind of training in a very thoughtful and planful way, because we really focused on helping managers give their employees the gift of presence that Ryan was talking about today. We did surveys, of course, around the program, and people would tell us, well, first off, this is the first time I've had a conversation with my manager in several months. And we're like, oh gosh, we hate to hear that, right? But it was true. It was out there. And so the fact that we were kind of forcing that was a big and important thing. But we also got feedback about how the quality of the conversation was so valuable to people. They heard things they had never heard before on both sides. The manager was hearing things and the employees were hearing things. And so that aspect of, giving them a structure and some tools was very enabling for them. I'll talk about this, probably later today as well. But we did an engagement survey at the beginning of our deployment. And we did an engagement survey 2 years later, and engagement went up 7 points. And I firmly believe that this aspect of managers really working differently with employees in a regular and frequent way was a big reason for that. And then also after, COVID hit and we were all remote, we did a survey then, and it probably won't surprise you guys, but it was refreshing to me. And that was that the managers were the single source of, they were the thing that was most beneficial to employees at that point in time. They talked a lot about the positive impact their managers were having on them. So it was very wonderful to hear how that training and the structure that we had provided to them pre-pandemic was helping with the pandemic situation, because actually employees were saying, you know what, we're doing okay. We're doing okay, and we're doing okay because of our managers. So Michaela, I'll turn it over to you now.
Yeah, this is great. You know, I was, as you said, Ingrid, the managers are really key to the employee experience, right? And, you know, we are thinking about how much the manager's role is sort of changing. And I think, Kate, you touched upon that, is that, you know, historically, the focus was more on directing and supervising people, right? And now it's more about enabling, empowering people, helping them, providing them the support, right? And so one thing that we are really focusing on is on the manager's coaching skills, right? So seeing managers as coaches rather than supervisors. And, you know, that goes to similar things, like Kate said, you know, understand the basics about how do I provide good recognition, specific recognition, how to appreciate in our quarterly conversations what people have done, but also how do I ask good questions so that we can help move forward and, you know, maybe use some feedback from, recent work to get even better next time this type of work comes up. So we've been focusing on these coaching skills, starting from basic, starting from, reminding people in the moments when they're about to have the conversations, right? What the good looks like. And with that, we really love the Betterworks platform because we can embed that in, in the process very easily. But of course, that's not the only thing. Managers tell us that they want, to get this support in the flow of work. And they also want help with difficult conversations, that's the hard part, right? When they have to deliver news that's not so easy. So we've been experimenting with some new ways of providing that learning, which include, for example, we have a coaching chatbot, which is basically embedded in our Google chat that the managers can sign up for, that shares with them some useful tips, some short learning content that they can use and sort of come back to. They can find it in their chat, which is where they are, which is where they work, right? And for the difficult conversations, the team's been experimenting with a tool where you practice that conversation with an avatar as opposed to a human being directly, right? Because that creates a bit of a safer space where you can really practice and try out, what you want to say differently, how you want to say it, and get some feedback. So this is an ongoing work. I wouldn't say that we've got it, but we're really focusing on the coaching skills of creating trust, listening well, asking good questions, helping generate more solutions, and then keeping people accountable also, right? So it's the support and care, but also performance standards and accountability.
Yeah, well, I think I get the opportunity to reinforce what both of you just said. So I think there are two ways we're equipping our leaders for the to be able to deliver on the human element and the results. The first is investing in their education, their training, and I think just like you've highlighted for us, if I look at what we're doing right now, the leading with empathy and really going deep. I mean, there's a lot of people that don't know what it means. So I just love these conversations around how they're sharing with each other. What are those little things that they do intentionally that are really big things? And, by, for example, starting a conversation with how are you, like really knowing it, they may be really good or they may just need to tell you and you're going to have to be good and want to know the next 10 or 15 minutes. It may be a very personal conversation. So it's those kinds of things and leading with empathy and how you are intentional. The second thing is we know around the world right now, we see a lot of attrition because people want to know we're investing in their careers. So our goal is how can we have the best leaders, the leaders to be known for developing people's careers. So very focused there. And then the other piece is operational excellence. So, when it is measuring most everything. And when I think about, I think about the training, the education for leaders, and what I have always called operationalizing leadership. And I'll just give you a couple of quick examples for that, and then measuring it. I saw in the chat, someone had asked if I would repeat like the 3 questions, like these quarterly conversations. And, with the first one being, how happy are you? Like really on a scale of 1 to 10, and your recommendations. The second one being, assess your performance, and then you have the right conversation, and then assess how you did on your learning goals. So the previous order and the right conversations. To get to the metrics, and I'll just give you an example. We must have 100% of these conversations every quarter, and we measure it. And we talk about, no person in Sprinklr left behind. So it is measured. And I think most importantly is by every leader. You can look by organization, you can look across Sprinklr, you can look by leader, and you have your data that says here are your top three themes and action you're expected to take action on this. We've got a operations review coming up Monday, Tuesday with our senior leaders, and that's just one example where they show their data and they speak to it. So it's built into the process. Again, the operating cadence or operationalizing leadership, the expectation is to continue to get better and better. And I think the last thing I'd say is, you were just talking about the coaching element. If we see there's a leader struggling, they could have low scores, relative to the Employee Delight Assurance program, or they could have high attrition. But that's when we lean in to coach and do more on one to understand what's really going on. And I will say one more thing on the operationalizing leadership is the expectation. And again, we measure all of this. Is every leader, for example, just has a weekly team meeting. They have to have a weekly one-on-one. You have to do heartbeats, 3 heartbeat calls. That's a 15-minute call, 3 to 4 times a week, just to stay close to your team, given so many people are remote. And, the town halls, listening forums, skip levels. So there are just a number of expectations with leaders relative to communications. And it's all about building trust, which gets back to the human element we're talking about.
Absolutely. Yeah, those are all really, really good insights. Shifting gears a little bit, where some uncertainty in the economy and feels like we've been in a period of flux for the past 2.5 years. And sometimes leaders can be fearful and want to kind of pull in on what they know, go back to top-down control methods. And so what advice do you give leaders if they're facing these fears or kind of going back to those?
Like this definitely is a natural human tendency, right? When you feel anxious to try to sort of narrow down and control more, right? And we've been trying to work on this through actually our leadership principles and our leadership behaviors, where we ask leaders to really not micromanage and control, right? But be very clear, provide a lot of clarity on why they're asking people to do something and what do them really want to achieve at the end, right? So like, what is the outcome? Why are we doing this? And what are some guardrails for the work? And then really letting people figure out the how, the steps that they have to take, because they are closer to what the work is, right? This is what we've been trying to do. It's not an easy work, but our managers, our leaders are trying to be more clear and to give more space for the how, even in the challenging times. right? Maybe even more, because we really need everyone's voice and everyone's engagement to deal with these challenges.
And I think for us, similar talked about the communications. First, to ensure that they're really listening, through all the ways that I just talked about. What we have found, listening forums that you would think of as skip levels are really powerful, as well as all the attrition data, the EDAP data, the anonymous or the confidential survey data. So showing them data, but I've also learned they really sometimes, no matter what we say, they need to hear it for themselves, which is why I think this communications cadence and what's expected, so they're hearing directly makes a difference. And then the third thing, and I know we all know it, is just showcasing across the company, starting to really highlight these leaders that are getting phenomenal results and just showing how they're really leaning into their people. That you really, the power of the and, you really can do both with kind and caring and the results. So a lot of highlighting our leaders and some successes there.
Those are great ideas that both of you offered. I will say that this has been one of the most disheartening things I've heard and experienced lately. I was reading a Wall Street Journal article just last month at some point, and they were talking about performance reviews and how forced distributions are coming back, and they're coming back because we need to identify those underperformers and exit them. So it's sounding very much 1980s-ish, right? And my whole demeanor when I was reading that article just really sank. So I've been spending some time reflecting on this. And I think, first off, we have to acknowledge that our leadership teams are under tremendous stress with what's going on with supply chain issues and inflation and, how hard it is to get talent, how hard it is to perform now, and the standards that they're being held accountable to. First off, we have to acknowledge that there's a reality that they're living that is more difficult today than it has perhaps been in years prior. And so, Michaela, to your point, it's a natural tendency, isn't it? Let me control more. Let me start doing things like monitoring when my employees are in the office or not, or, when, performance reviews are done, or have we fit our forced distribution. So it's a natural tendency, but it's rooted in two things. One, fear, right? And the second is a mistrust, I think, in themselves about their ability to engage versus ability to control. And I think they trust their ability to control more than they trust their ability to engage. And I think that's the root that we've got to get to in all of this, because I just read this morning, 32%, this is a Gallup survey, 32% of people report feeling engaged in 2022. 32%. Come on, we can do better than that, right? So the core question I have for leaders who are tending towards this right now is, what will give you more output for the effort? All the monitoring and, control mechanisms that you're putting in place to perhaps find the few, because I believe it's only a few, who are taking advantage of remote work or taking advantage of situations now. Or putting work into really engaging people and getting that engagement score up to 90, 95%. Which one is going to give you more output? And I think it's the latter. I really do. And so we just have to help them see and trust that they have that ability and walk with them in that journey.
Mm-hmm. So you bring up this good point, sorry, Ingrid, that we often design for the our processes or our HR people programs, right, with the worst case scenarios in mind, and do they really enable the best that we can get from people if we do it that way?
Yeah, and you really reinforced, and I'm thinking about us that are in the HR space, is meeting our people where they are because you said that it was, disappointing or disillusioning to hear that some of the leaders that want to revert back to what might have worked for them before. And you know what, that was kind of like my aha, because you think, how can we do that? How can we reach in trying to control when we've had record results during the pandemic, but recognizing where they start from to begin with and how we've got to help them work through and what's going on with them, I think is just it's a great reminder to us in this field to meet them where they are.
It's our empathy as well, isn't it?
Exactly. No, it's a really good point, because I thought, okay, wow, I better remind myself of that when this happens.
Yeah, we all can get better at this, right? In the stressful situations.
And that's the fun of it, this human-centered leadership. There's no tenure in this world. You're never going to hit it perfectly. It's always learning and growing, all of us included.
Kind of a related question on changing behavior and getting those changes to really stick. These new programs, you can have all the best approaches in the world, but it's really only successful if it's actually adopted by the people it's intended for. And so how have you driven that actual engagement from employees to managers to leadership in the processes that you've done?
So we have tried, to keep improving our performance enablement, especially for a long time. I remember several attempts, right? And I would say these latest attempt that we had, we really tried to be human-centric or people-centric, right? And involve a lot of people in the design, right? So this is a classic sort of design thinking approach where you try to understand the pain points that people have with whatever you want to do and listen to them and try to design to that, right? And then when you show that empathy and listen to people, create some solutions and then come back to them and see whether they, that addresses the pain points or not, right? So taking this kind of iterative and very user-centric approach was our latest attempt, to design something that will work. And we will have to listen again to people, and we have to continually listen, right? So we try to be sort of adaptive, and when we hear feedback, make adjustments to what we are doing at the particular moment. So I think that's a really critical part of listening up front, but then also listening throughout and making adjustments. And sometimes it's hard to decide, like, is it right now, people just grappling with change and we need to stay the course on what we've designed, or do we need to already make the change and the adaptation, right? So not easy to do, but let's try.
And I think in addition to your point, involving people in the design, and for me, especially our senior leaders, because they're really the ones that are driving the company, driving the organization. So always make sure that they're heavily involved. And I think and just another example is the feedback that we get on, like I said, whether it's across the company. Every quarter, you always give, here are the top 3 things that we heard you say, and here's the action plan, and they see the results. So that we heard you, and here's the action plan. I know it sounds simple, but just being consistent, that they always know that we really are listening and that we're going to do something about it, I think is really important. And I think the other thing that goes with hand in hand is just measuring everything, because they know we're going to come back to them, and they know they're going to get the truth, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and there'll be an action plan to go with.
It's my turn now to just reinforce what both of you have said. I don't know that I have a whole lot more to contribute. Maybe, what I would add, we did a lot of measurement, right? We did the same thing, reporting of completion of quarterly conversation rates and all. We used to publish the completion rates on a weekly basis to the executive team, so we'd get a little competition going amongst them, including, who's the highest at the top down to who's the lowest. And I think that had some positive impact in terms of them beginning to say more to their team, well, guys, we got to get these done, right? And reasons and conversations about why we were doing that. We also had a really wonderful executive team that was very engaged. And, as soon as the CEO started doing them with his team, it made a huge difference as well. So, it's same levers that you two are talking about here. And I think it's just your kind of basic need to stay on top of things, be listening, be shifting, be changing, be adapting to feedback. And, you get what you measure.
And internal competition, I love you highlighted that. That really is a beautiful thing.
Sure can be.
Yeah, just to echo that, when Kate and I were working on that, I remember it was like around the time of the Olympics, you had a whole like Olympic theme of gold, silver, and bronze, and that just made it a little bit more fun, and I thought it was effective. Well, on that topic of measuring impact, what have been some of the most impactful changes that you saw as you brought your organization through these transformations? And how did you measure that impact or the progress that you made on the business?
So I'll just jump in then on this. So I think that there are some that are anecdotal, and then there are also some that are more systematic measurement. The anecdotal ones, in my opinion, were the most powerful. I mean, I loved hearing the stories. We had an executive who said, these quarterly conversations just saved that person's career, because I don't know that I would have had the discussion or had it in this way. And we were able to, unearth stuff that really got us moving forward in a much more productive way. Or it was the stories from employees who said, my manager hasn't talked with me like this, and as long as I can remember. And so all of a sudden I understand better what's expected, and they understand what my experience is. And, we're creating more trust in that relationship because of this. So it was those types of things, Ingrid, that we just saw happen time and time again that, let us know we were on the right path in this. I'll bring up the two big measures, right, that really stood out to me in particular. One being that huge jump in our engagement survey results. And in part, we had also launched a new strategy at the time, and people were better understanding the direction of the organization. But there was so much data inherent in there that their manager was more connected, and they felt more connected because of this. And I really firmly believe that these quarterly conversations were a big, big part of that. And then, the other aspect of the COVID survey that we did, I just felt so grateful and appreciative that we had launched the Elevate program prior to that, because it gave managers exactly the tools we wanted them to have. So those were all good things. We, still did ratings as well, and we would see in our performance ratings differentiation. We didn't have to go force a distribution. We gave suggested distributions and things like that, but people were differentiating. They were paying more attention and seeing more than I think they would have seen if we had just kind of stuck with the standard. So those were some of the examples that we had.
Yeah, I would say it's like very, very similar for us. Right? With any kind of sort of human program, what you start with is adoption, right? And, we made a mistake many years ago that we sort of wanted to do away with all the compliance-driven nature of this, right? And so we stopped kind of measuring or enforcing that. And that was a mistake. We had to come back to looking at, okay, how is the adoption? Are these conversations actually happening? And so we're doing that now, and we are watching whether that adoption is climbing up, right? So we are not forcing it like Kate was saying, but we are, nudging and encouraging and seeing whether adoption is growing, whether it's the quarterly conversations, whether it's feedback giving, recognition giving, using the platform, etc. Right? And then there's the engagement data. We also look at that and we ask some questions around basically conversations, performance, development, growth, and also like direct manager behaviors to have like a manager effectiveness index. But I agree that like the biggest power is in the qualitative data, right? And what you see, like whether people are like asking good questions, for example, right? In meetings, directing versus enabling, right? All of those things that we want to see. So some of it is observed and a lot of it is measurable. We've also introduced something that we call upward feedback, right? And we want to give managers the option to have some feedback around how they're doing on a more regular basis than our engagement survey is. So we're going to be watching how those coaching skills are improving as well through the upward feedback. So there'll be some measures.
I think the only thing I can add to that is or just reinforce communications. So I'm thinking as I'm listening to the two of you talk, is I just look at the communications cadence, and that looks like, twice a quarter you have all your senior leaders together. You have a monthly leadership forum. There's a quarterly leadership forum. There is a town hall every month, an all hands every quarter. So, and I could go on. The point is when you think about driving these programs, these key programs, as well as the results. So again, going back to measuring everything, these programs are reinforced. You highlight the people that are, the leaders, the people that are excelling. And there's also the data. I mentioned this earlier, but I just love that to the leader level, it is very openly shared, where you can go and see attrition data. You can see the happiness scores. You can see pulse. Like everything, it kind of goes to Kate's point earlier about internal competition. It's just very, very transparent, which means everybody wants to take their game to another level. So the more you can get to the point, so it's communications and the data and the actions, the more you can invest there, the payoff is just huge.
I love this, the transparency, and we actually, trying to get even better at this. And you mentioned communication. This is something that I didn't talk about, but this year we actually rebranded our program and we are calling it #EvenBetter, right? And so the idea is about how does everyone just get ongoing basis even better at what they do with the help of others around them. And so this, gives us a platform to talk about in a way that is non-threatening, right? Because let's be honest, like performance management is not exactly something that people love when they hear it, right? So we try to, again, make it future focused and positive through the communications using this brand of even better.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I love it. Having that more personal touch on the communication I see it makes such a big difference. I also separately mentioned the anecdotes that come out that really illuminate the data. And from my own experience, when I'm working with teams that are rolling out these new programs, I'm seeing one tip of the iceberg for the organization. But over time, I can see just a cultural shift in the way people are working together, the way that they're talking about their job, the way that they're talking about the people that they work with, and the whole process in the organization. And even when I have just my one little slice of visibility into an organization, I can really see when that kind of underlying culture shifts because of these, which to me, I mean, that's one of the most exciting parts about what I do. Well, we have a few more minutes, so I'm going to shift to take some questions from the audience, and we have a few good ones here. But, audience members, if you want to submit anything for Q&A, now's the time. So this first question is about how do you influence the business to make these types of changes?
We were lucky this time around that this wasn't a HR-driven change, right? It was actually business-driven change because we had like a new business strategy, new leadership, lots of changes in our external environment. So it was part of this sort of business transformation to elevate our performance, to get better at how we do things, right? And to sort of re-energize this culture of giving feedback and getting better at things. So that really played to our advantage, and we got the business leaders really engaged in that. We've tried to revamp or re-energize performance in the past in the absence of that kind of environment, and it wasn't as successful. So trying to find what the business is, going for, and what are the changes that are happening, and how can you link the change in approaching performance and people's engagement to it.
Yeah, I think in addition to showing the data, the other thing, I'm always trying to ask myself with, let's say with the executive team, what is the best way that they learn? So I'll give you an example. So there's a lot of sharing, and try to be very intentional around the sharing, whether it's articles or organizations they really respect. So I do a lot of sharing. The other thing is to, I learned a long time ago, I don't have to be the one to influence. We just got to get them to the right place. And so thinking about who are those people that they might respect. I'll give you a quick example. Is, let's say, as head of sales, and you're trying to influence them, relative to this. And again, I'm making up that example because our head of sales is phenomenal at this, getting the human and the results right. Having said that, it's like, how can you connect them with someone that is, done this role, phenomenal reputation, and does it incredibly well. So I try to do a lot of connections externally as well to influence based on companies they respect or people that they respect as well.
Those are all great things. And, like you, Michaela, I had a little bit of an advantage, I think, in this because we were effectively a startup at the time. We were implementing, we were 20,000 employees and $4.5 billion in revenue, but we had just gone under private equity. And so there was a whole new executive team, and, we were able to kind of, I guess, strike early in that. So there's like core questions that an executive team is dealing with at that time, like, what are our goals? Oh, well, let's use OKRs, so there were things that we could plug into that were the issues or the challenges or the problems that they themselves were asking at that point in time. And it changed over time, right? So really deeply listening for what are the challenges that they're experiencing and how might we shift or change, or how might something new connect into that was, I think, the only strategy that we used that might have been a little bit different than what I was hearing from the two of you in this because of the nature of what we were going through. A great example was we had great OKRs, but they hadn't yet figured out the process of really deploying them amongst themselves and aligning amongst themselves. So our next iteration in setting the next year's OKRs, that's what we were focusing on. So you just kind of grew with the business in that way and the maturation of that team and its leadership.
I think those are all really good points. Our next question is really about working kind of in a cross-cultural situation. So how do you enact change at the local level without the right buy-in from global management? Our company is based in Denmark, and I feel like there's a cultural misunderstanding on their end on the pain points facing the employees we have in the Americas.
Well, I can tell, having had this in the past, because I do know we all much prefer for this to start at the top. What I found worked was going to those leaders that were way respected in the organization and pulling them in and saying, I need your help. And so basically finding the right champions, creating that small team that I knew could enact the transformation that we wanted. And I also knew that the executive team would listen to it. Just one way I have found to work.
Yeah, we face this all the time, right? With like we have about 17,000 employees that participate in this performance program, and they're all over the place. And we face this a lot, right? For example, upward feedback, right, is not like in some cultures works super nicely and everyone's fine with it, and in others it's quite countercultural, right? So we try to appeal in our global program to the things that are largely universal, right? Like the need to get better at things and to have conversations about it, I think is probably universal. But engage champions, like you were saying, Diane, in the design from all around the world, as well as in implementing, so that we can hear, and then be patient, right? That something like giving upward feedback is going to take some time in some cultures to adopt. And that's why we are not forcing it, right? Like employees are free to provide the upward feedback. If they don't feel comfortable, they don't have to, right? And we see whether, again, the adoption is growing with time. So I think some patience is required and some open channels of communication or people involved that represent different cultures and different places around the world.
Patience is so so important. I'm really glad you said that because it does take time to kind of get people used to this. I don't know that I have much to add. We had a global team that did a lot of the design and rollout, and we were really fortunate. I think our executive team is very accessible, right? So, members of the team who were based in EMEA would go talk with the EMEA leader, and then members of the team who were based in APAC would go talk with the APAC leadership and the HR team. So it felt like, that there were tentacles everywhere in the design and the deployment itself. So it didn't feel quite so, let's do it in one small group and then just roll this out, right? Don't you love the rollouts that come from the central body? So, and I think you said this, Michaela, the more you can have that representation throughout the process, the better.
Yeah, and actually, Kate, I'll build on what you said, and we're almost at time, but to your point about having the tentacles everywhere, when we were doing this implementation, we started with the HR organization because it was a truly global, as opposed to kind of different departments that were more focused on regional businesses. The choosing to start with like certain shared services that really did work as global functions helped us like build a foundation where we had a lot of inputs from all over the world and from different cultures and kind of how different things might be perceived, what might work well in different contexts.
Great add, Ingrid. Thanks for that.
Well, we are coming up on time, and so I do want to thank our participants. It's been really lovely hearing from all of you. And thank you to our audience for your questions and participation as well. We are going to now move into a brief break, and then our next session with Jamie Aiken, titled How to Enable Great Performance. She will share some key best practices for transforming to a people-centric performance enablement process. So thank you all very much for joining us, and we'll reconvene shortly.
Thanks for having us. Bye.
Thank you all.